Okay, let's dive right into an absolutely massive, comprehensive study of the intricate eschatological timeline proposed by the YouTube channel Repoman 64. Now, we aren't just looking at a casual back-of-the-napkin prediction today. Not at all. We are looking at a vast, interconnected web of historical data, astronomy, and ancient scripture. This creator has spent years essentially acting as a theological detective, constructing a deeply mathematical blueprint of biblical prophecy in an attempt to perfectly align ancient historical events with future global milestones. We are going to break down the complex arithmetic he uses, the highly specific historical dates he references, and the fascinating future timelines he maps out. Think of this whole thing like a giant jigsaw puzzle, where every single number has a specific, predetermined slot to fill. And just a quick note before we really get going, as always, you can find the link to the original source study right below this presentation so you can go check the channel out and verify the numbers for yourself. To summarize this massive timeline neutrally and clearly, we will map out the study across 6 distinct sections. The Repoman 64 study, the 364-day Enoch calendar, historical anchors and math, imminent high watch dates, the fascinating Potter's Field prophecy, and finally, 2030 and the tribulation. Section 1, the Repoman 64 study, mapping the end times. We begin our study with the very foundation of Repoman 64's calculations. This is a system he has developed over years of deeply cross-referencing biblical dates with astronomical logic. It's a system built entirely on the premise that God is, fundamentally, a master mathematician. According to this view, the creator has hidden exact time spans, precise dates, and profound mathematical symmetry right in plain sight within the text of the scriptures, just waiting to be decoded. According to the channel, the exact dates of the rapture and the tribulation are meticulously woven into this math. Now, Repoman 64 stresses that while the final date was written in stone before the foundation of the world, believers are actively meant to study these numbers as a way to draw closer to the creator. He views the increasing natural disasters we see on the news, what he refers to scripturally as the sea roaring, massive solar flares, and escalating earthquakes, as clear, undeniable indicators that we are approaching the absolute end of this mathematical timeline. He even actively invites his viewers to scrutinize his work and try to disprove his math, using that feedback to endlessly refine his comprehensive blueprint. It's a constantly evolving collaborative study. Section 2, the 364-day Enoch calendar, the foundational math. So, to make this complex biblical math work, Repoman 64 completely resets our basic understanding of what a year actually is. I mean, if you try to use our modern calendar hanging on your wall, his entire prophetic timeline immediately falls apart. The study proposes that the standard 365-day solar year that we all use today is slightly off for the purposes of prophetic calculations. Instead, the blueprint relies entirely on a 364-day sidereal year, a concept he links directly to ancient texts like the Book of Enoch and the Dead Sea Scrolls. So how does this actually work? Well, Repoman 64 argues that any 364-day cycle, the Earth returns to its original exact position relative to a distant star, rather than our sun. He claims the modern Gregorian calendar essentially steals 4 minutes a day. Now, I know 4 minutes might not sound like a whole lot, but multiply that by 365 days and you get roughly 24 hours. Over the span of thousands of years of biblical history, those stolen minutes completely distort the timeline. In his blueprint, correcting this to a 364-day year creates a perfectly constant head of the year that never shifts or changes. It lands permanently, forever, on March 16th, which is defined as the day of equal parts light and dark. Section 3. Historical anchors and math, proving the concept. Okay, the crucial point in the study is how this 364-day calendar perfectly aligns the ancient events of Noah's flood with the life and death of Jesus. For Repoman 64, this alignment is the ultimate mathematical proof of his entire concept. According to the study, the math only works if the Great Flood began exactly on October 31st, a date known on the ancient calendar as Heshvan 17. By starting on this incredibly specific date, exactly 150 days later lands perfectly on the date Nisan 14. Now, why is this so significant? Because Nisan 14 is the exact future date of Jesus' crucifixion. Think about the poetic symmetry going on here. The exact day the death-bringing floodwaters finally begin to recede to save Noah is the exact day Christ is crucified to save humanity. Then, exactly 153 days later, the ark comes to rest on Mount Ararat on the date Nisan 17. Which maps directly to the day of Jesus' resurrection. The symmetry is entirely deliberate. The study insists that if you try to move the start of the flood to any other day, this stunning prophetic crossover is completely destroyed. And this brilliantly illustrates the symmetry in Repoman 64's timeline regarding the life of Jesus too. He firmly rejects the popular traditional theory that Jesus was born in the spring. The study presents a very straightforward mathematical argument for this. If Jesus lived for exactly 33.5 years to the day, and he died in the spring on March 30th, you simply count backwards 6 months. Mathematically, he had to be born in the fall. Therefore, the timeline places Jesus' birth securely on September 30th, 3 BC, during the Feast of Tabernacles. His 33.5-year life is mapped out meticulously here. We see his baptism on August 15th, 26 AD, his ministry beginning on the High Holy Day of Yom Kippur on September 24th, and it all culminates exactly as calculated at the cross on March 30 AD. The channel goes on to highlight this deep, underlying symmetry, using highly specific numbers to bridge the Old and New Testaments. For instance, the study points out that exactly 110 days pass between the cross and the Feast of New Wine. From that feast, it is exactly another 70 days until the anniversary of Jesus' first miracle of turning water into wine. Now, you might be asking, why do 110 and 70 actually matter? Well, this exact 110 and 70-day split perfectly mirrors a famous Old Testament mourning period, specifically the mourning of the patriarch Jacob, whose embalming and mourning process historically spanned those precise day counts. This is a primary example of how Repoman 64 uses arithmetic to find hidden, deliberate harmony spanning across thousands of years of scriptural history.
Section 4. Imminent High Watch Dates, the Current Window.
Let's move to how this builds into Repoman 64's immediate predictions, because he uses all of this historical math we just discussed to look forward, establishing what he calls high watch dates. The study identifies a highly compressed 21-day block of massive eschatological significance occurring in July. After a specific period of quiet on the calendar, he marks July 16th, which is the historical anniversary of Moses shattering the tablets of the law in anger. July 17th marks what he mathematically calculates as the final Pentecost, and July 18th is the start of the Feast of New Wine. Repoman 64 views this super tight cluster of dates as a prime, highly likely window for a pre-tribulation rapture. He notes that the current incredibly tense geopolitical events in the Middle East, such as the conflicts involving Israel and its neighbors, seem to be escalating right on cue, serving as a real-world ticking clock that aligns perfectly with his calendar. Looking slightly further ahead, the study points to a monumental anniversary. August 15th, 2026, mathematically marks exactly 2,000 years to the very day since Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist in the Jordan River in 26 AD. Now, in biblical theology, the number 2000 is heavily associated with the church age. This stems from prophecies that equate 1,000 years to a single day, mapping out a 2-day or 2,000-year period of grace. In the Repoman 64 study, this 2026 milestone is massive. It signifies the true beginning of the final era, perfectly mirroring how Jesus' own public ministry powerfully kicked off, directly following his baptism and his 40 days of fasting in the wilderness.
Section 5. The Potter's Field Prophecy, the Judas Subplot.
Okay, we really have to dive into this incredibly bizarre and utterly fascinating subplot the study outlines. This involves Judas Iscariot, modern-day real estate, and international property law. Seriously. Repoman 64 notes that Judas's infamous 30 pieces of betrayal silver were ultimately used to purchase a specific 5-acre plot of land in the Valley of Hinnom. Historically, this valley is also known as Gehenna, a place so cursed it literally became the biblical symbol for hell and destruction. The study points out a pretty eerie parallel here. Judas committing suicide by hanging on a tree in this cursed valley was likely Satan's twisted, failed attempt to emulate or mock Christ's ultimate sacrifice on the cross. Today, this exact 5-acre potter's field is not lost to history. It is actually occupied by the Akeldama Monastery, sitting squarely inside modern boundary lines in Jerusalem. So here is where the study makes a truly startling claim. Drawing on the modern Jewish law of return, which grants property and citizenship rights to returning Jews, the channel proposes an incredible legal loophole. The study argues that during the events of the rapture, Judas, who is identified prophetically as the son of perdition, will literally physically be resurrected. And because that cursed piece of land was historically purchased in his name with his money, he will legally step forward to claim this 5-acre potter's field. Think about the sheer logistics of that for a second. Repoman 64 points out that a resurrected Judas will literally own the modern warehouses, the Greek Orthodox monastery, and even a local tennis court that have been built on the site over the centuries. He will supposedly operate from this newly reclaimed real estate, acting as the Antichrist figure and collecting revenue to fund his operations for the final 3.5 years of the tribulation. I mean, a resurrected biblical figure claiming a tennis court through international property law? It is definitely one of the most unique angles in this entire blueprint. Section 6. 2030 and the Tribulation, the Grand Conclusion. As we zoom out from the immediate high watch dates and the literal real estate claims of a resurrected Judas, we arrive at the overarching destination of this mathematical study. Where does this incredibly precise timeline actually end? Well, understanding this requires looking at how Repoman 64 uses prophetic day-for-year counts combined with the Jubilee year cycles. A Jubilee is a biblical mandate occurring every 50 years where debts are forgiven and land is returned to its original owners. By mathematically layering these 50-year Jubilee cycles over the course of human history, the study securely locks down the exact end-of-decade timeline pointing directly to the years following 2030.
Applying that biblical principle found in the books of Psalms and Peter that a day is as 1,000 years, the study maps exactly 4,000 years from the dawn of creation to Christ's birth. Then, the timeline undergoes what theologians call a dispensational shift. Essentially, this means God hits the pause button on the prophetic clock for the Jewish people and starts a brand new 2,000-year clock for the global church, right at the exact moment of the cross. By taking this shift into account and counting exactly 2,000 years from the crucifixion in 30 AD, the math lands us squarely in the year 2030. Now, according to the blueprint, 2030 is not the end of the world, but rather the exact midpoint of the 7-year tribulation period.
Just imagine the sheer precision required for this math to align. Repoman 64 asserts that by March 30, 2030, which again is exactly 2,000 years to the very day of the crucifixion, monumental events will unfold. The bride of Christ is already gone. The two witnesses, prophetic figures tasked with preaching during the end times, will be martyred in the streets, lie dead for exactly 3.5 days, and then resurrect and ascend to heaven, perfectly mirroring the timeline of Jesus. At this exact pivotal moment, the study claims that 1/3 of the global Jewish population will finally recognize the truth, become believers, and flee as a remnant. They will escape to Petra, an actual ancient rock fortress located in modern-day Jordan. There, the math dictates they will be supernaturally protected for exactly 1,260 days while the rest of the world outside suffers the final catastrophic bowls of wrath and battles violently for dwindling global resources. And this mathematically neat conclusion asserts that all tribulation and suffering ends exactly in the year 2033. At this specific point on the calendar, the Battle of Armageddon concludes and the 1,000-year millennial reign of peace officially begins. What makes 2033 so structurally significant in this blueprint? Well, it perfectly mirrors the age of Jesus at his ascension, 33 years old. This ultimate symmetry serves as the final bow tying it all together, bringing the entire biblical narrative perfectly full circle and sealing the prophetic math once and for all. As we impartially lay out this incredibly complex, math-heavy study, we've looked at everything from a 364-day sidereal calendar and ancient floods to modern real estate law and cosmic arithmetic. It leaves us with a really profound question to consider. If Repoman 64's blueprint is accurate, and this deep symmetry truly underpins all of Scripture, just how heavily will the global events of this current decade be written in stone? Are the escalating, terrifying headlines we see every day just random, unfortunate global chaos? Or are we ticking down to a very exact, mathematically inescapable 2,000-year anniversary? It's a fascinating, massive framework to study, and I highly encourage you to check out the source linked below if you want to explore the intricate math further. Thank you for studying with us today, and keep learning.